I was diagnosed with ADHD when I was about 8 years old. At school, I was the first kid who was diagnosed, so all the teachers had to go through some extra courses to learn how to get along with a child like me in class. But now, as a teacher myself, yeah, you see sometimes pupils with ADHD, and yeah, I was like that, and it helps to place some of the interactions with the kids. You notice that you are a bit different than other kids when you grow up. Sometimes with friends, you notice you're very, very active, and they're all like, "Oh man, cool down." But I think as you grow older, you get some coping mechanisms, and they help you. You develop your own strategies. I think I stopped medication when I went to university. When I was about 19, 20 years old, I noticed that especially the age, the hyperactivity, that went down a lot. The concentration problem is still there, but again, way less frequent than when I was a kid.
I was talking to my partner who has ADHD and is autistic, and I was like, oh, but I couldn't even pretend to understand like the kinds of things that you go through because that's so different to my life. And then they kind of like they took a minute and then they were like, wait, sorry, do you think that you don't have ADHD? And I was like, yeah. And they were like, I just thought you knew and you hadn't told me. Like, I just thought you were private about it. And then like basically I met a few other friends who had ADHD and they were like, oh, I just assumed you knew. Do you not know that you have ADHD? And I was like, no, this has never occurred to me in my life. In the last 2 years, I've spent a lot of time like reflecting on the rest of my life and being like, everything makes so much more sense now. I was diagnosed in my late 20s and I've been living with it ever since.
I would say that there's certainly a hyper focus on my interests. I think that would be fair, and that was one of the things that when I initially began to looking into like getting an ADHD diagnosis, was one of the things that got brought up to me because I think I was asking somebody for a book recommendation or something, and I was just like, oh, I hate this because like I want to read a book about blah blah, but like my brain is only like the only thing that I can engage with at all is this one kind of book on this very specific topic, and I've been reading I've read like 15 of them now, and I'm absolutely bored to tears, but my brain just won't let me latch onto anything else. So yeah, I think I probably suffer from hyperfixations. That was kind of like the first red flag, I guess, for me. Then it kind of made me want to go seek my diagnosis.
And my diagnosis is self-diagnosed. Like I've done some research about it, but I haven't had the financial capabilities to actually get tested and confirmed. But with the amount of traits that I've shown and the amount of traits that match with ADHD, well, 2 and 2 is 4. But I probably would have changed things a bit. Probably sought proper help earlier, like that I get medicine, get help, because I had to figure it out all on my own.
I was only diagnosed very recently, like 4 months ago or something. So very, very recently. The most important reason I want to get the test done because I was having some difficulties with school throughout, well, my entire school career. And I always heard the sentences, well, did you do enough? Aren't you just being lazy? Why can't you just do that? Or why can't you just do that? And well, it made me very unhappy. So it was something when it came up with the psychologist that I might have something like ADHD, that I wanted to get the test done.
I was diagnosed 2 years ago for the second time. I was diagnosed as a kid too, because then my hyperactivity was through the roof. But after a while, a psychologist tested me, and she told my parents I couldn't have ADHD because I could do too much, which is, of course, total bollocks. So then I had no diagnosis anymore because my parents believed this. So I went without any support, and recently I went to a psychologist, and he said you have ADHD. And the more I discovered, the more I got to know why I couldn't function in school or in in my family or at the youth movement I was involved with, what my problems were. The more I researched, the more I found out about myself.
When they diagnosed me with ADHD, the doctor was going through all the questions, and one of the questions is about the symptoms, and it's like, subject talks at a length and volume that might be perceived as antisocial by others. And he just looked at me and he looked at the form and he said, I'm just going to say yes for that one.
ADHD interferes with our response inhibition. It's an executive function, so we don't have a break. Normal people can say, "Oh no, I can wait." For people with ADHD, this gets affected by the ADHD. So we don't have a timer on our response. We just naturally do it immediately.
So growing up, I was bullied a lot and really unpopular because I would talk so much and very loudly, and I wasn't always aware of how loudly and how much I was talking. And then also I interrupt people a lot without meaning to. And again, people thought that I was being rude. They thought that I didn't want to hear what they had to say.
I think I internalized a bit. Some of my friend groups describe me as someone very timid, very calm, but deep down I'm not that. Some friends group know me the way the people who know me as a kid and I'm still friends with today, they know what I was before, so they still see that in me sometimes.
ADHD affects the short memory of the person who has it. So it's difficult for us to get information and remember it for a few minutes. So we're often trying to immediately give our response, because if we don't, we'll lose it. And that makes me always want to finish someone else's sentence, or it makes me interrupt people with an idea I have, or a remark I have about what they're saying, just to have it out there. Because if it's out there, the other people might remember. The other person might remember, even if I don't. So that's something I do often.
I think if you're mindful of it, sometimes you can kind of like dial it back, or maybe you can apologize and say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to talk over you." And it's something that I've had to learn to do, especially playing TTRPGs online, because it's really difficult to play, like via Discord or whatever. It's way easier when you're at a table as to not talk over people, and because there's a slight delay and stuff. And I just say to people, if I'm being annoying, if I'm not shutting up, just let me know and I'll be quiet for a bit, because sometimes I don't realize when I'm going.
Well, the most important tip I could give is less is always more, because when you do less, you are listening to others and you can react on what they do and you can take cues.
And if you work with someone with ADHD, just recognize the fact that it's hard for us and that it has nothing to do with you, and that it's not that we dislike you, that it's not that we want to be rude to you. If you both acknowledge this, then it's way easier to be open about it.
I do have a tendency to ramble on, to talk loudly, to get passionate about things, to discount what I'm interested in depending on what I'm like fixated on at the time, or like maybe it gets annoying when I play D&D because like if I'm because I'm like fixed on D&D, like I know like loads of the rules and stuff, and then I'm like actually it's and I'm sure that's kind of annoying, but that's I just can't help myself. It's almost compulsive.
I am very much a rule lawyer by nature, not because I want to be. It's just like I have this is the box that I know that exists. So it's easy, it's safe, it's knowing what to expect. But as soon as like a new DM says like, hey, I have this rule, I tend to edit that for that specific DM, and I know, okay, this is a specific thing that happens here specifically. Making sure that like specific type of rules are clear from the beginning, so that I know that I have like the knowledge and the safety on how to properly act within the game.
I think I do often experience kind of rejection-sensitive dysphoria. So people will say something very, very small about like something that they're upset with me about, and I would go home and just like cry all night, and I would have a real I would have a breakdown, and like sometimes I would have a panic attack, and it would be very difficult.
Like you always feel people must hate you for some reason. There's something you did that they didn't like. There's something you said that was hurtful to them, and you start looking for clues about this. And these can be very small. They're just innocent little things someone said, and we take it the wrong way because we think the other person must dislike me.
I can be very social and I can be very happy when being social, but every time afterwards I will start overthinking everything that I said and that I did, and how loud I was speaking and how much I was speaking over people, maybe, or start getting very insecure. So that's something that's very present in my daily life.
The advice I would give for people who want to communicate with someone with ADHD, and the advice I give to my friends, especially in regard to things like RSD, rejection sensitive dysphoria, is honestly just clear communication, and when in doubt, over explain. Don't assume that someone with ADHD is going to interpret your words in the best possible way.
I just want to be sure that they dislike something I did, that they don't dislike me, if that makes sense. So gentle criticism is often better, because I have experienced so much negative feedback in my life. If I don't know people, I would like them to be a little more gentle than if I do know them.
Please don't forget to give them positive reinforcement. We are much more vulnerable to criticism, and we're much more likely to misinterpret even constructive feedback. And so just make sure when you're giving constructive feedback to think about something positive you can also say, and to clarify that whatever your feedback is, it's not personal, and you're not saying that they're failing as a person. You're only expressing, try to frame it as something constructive. You want to work with them to have a better game, rather than that you're trying to make them feel bad about themselves.
I do have trouble concentrating. Very often, constantly. Yeah, I know what I do to improve my concentration. I write things down. Everything that I write down will get done eventually, but I will find it sometimes, like a few weeks later, a post-it that fell somewhere on the ground, and I will find it, and I will still finish the task.
Yeah, so I think for other people to help me concentrate, the big thing for me is understanding that if I'm doing something else, it means I'm concentrating more. So a lot of the time, in my experience with people who are neurotypical, they feel that I'm not paying attention to them if I'm not only paying attention to them, but that's not how my brain works. That if a player with ADHD, for example, is making notes or doodling whilst you're speaking, don't take that personally. It doesn't mean we're ignoring you. It doesn't mean we don't care about the story you're telling. Normally it means we care a lot. I often knit when I'm on the camera or when I'm playing games, because it's just something to do with my hands, and it means that I've got something else going on that's eating up all of that extra energy.
One of my first real-life D&D campaigns, they were all sitting down, and I was just walking around the table the entire time because I noticed that if I have the freedom to move, I also concentrate better.
I'm fidgeting to experience enough stimulation, because everyone needs the right amount of stimulation for them to be able to focus. It's just the margin for people with ADHD is much smaller. We get understimulated or overstimulated rather fast. So I'll fidget and apply the rest of the stimulation I need. And that's something I can stop doing, and then if I'm overstimulated, and get back into the Goldilocks zone.
In online games, it's a bit harder because you're just sitting behind the screen, and there isn't the little social interactions that you can usually have near the table. So what I usually tend to do is just keep my mind focused and have something small, like a small little video game open, so that I can just have my hand busy clicking, and then I can still focus on the other thing.
I think one way of getting people's attention is to be very expressive. Using your hands and be very expressive about it helps as DM to describe a scene that is coming on. I love all the details in a fight, how things are going. Just not, you stabbed him. No, where is he stabbed? What do you see about him? Is he bleeding and stuff like that? I think all those details help to get the attention from the players, especially with players who are easily wandering off. All the juicy details, so they can use their imagination, not on something else, but on the game that is played.
I DM as well, and I've noticed that if I like give those like specific little things, that people tend to like it a lot more, and that keeps focus as well. Just like, wait, why did they mention that specifically? Okay, let's go.
I still have problems concentrating myself, especially during long talks when people are talking for like a couple of minutes. Then after 2 minutes, my mind goes, oh, and there's that thing about that I have to think about, and who, but what if he says that? And then you're just losing your attention to the conversation. When there's a long monologue or there's a dialogue that your character is not involved with, yeah, sometimes it's easy to lose track on the conversation.
Quite often, like directing a question at somebody is a good way to like, and then even if I have to say, sorry, I missed that, can you just explain what's going on again? That's a good way to get people back in the room. I think if there's a good place for you to pivot and just be like, what is so and so doing right now? It's a good way to pull you back into kind of into the room.
If you know you have a player with ADHD, finding a way to invite them and address them directly, and you might not want to make them uncomfortable. Like, I'm not sure that I would be comfortable if I was playing with someone, they were like, Ella, I assume you're not paying attention, pay attention. You know, that would feel bad. But if they found a way to kind of make it so that my character, you just call on my character. So if there's some kind of check that characters need to do to start this moment or something, it's just being like, hey, Ella's character, I want you to look at this castle or something, then that's really helpful. Like finding ways that you can essentially build signposts into your fiction to help your players with ADHD be aware of the parts of the story you really want them to notice.
You can see it really well. As a teacher, I got some kids with ADHD, and yeah, I can see when I'm telling them something or I'm teaching the class, you can see them just diverting their thoughts, and then it helps to do something. It can be small things, look them in the eye, or make a reference about something they did earlier or they said earlier, and then you can see them all instantly. Yeah, they're back into the lesson.
Knowing your own limits, knowing where you're likely to fall foul, is something that is the most helpful thing. Like so you can present your case to the, like, not your case, but to say to the GM, hi, I struggle when XYZ happens. Can you throw me a prompt every now and again? That's something that I ask for. If it looks like I've checked out, throw me a prompt, and then I'll ask you maybe to repeat yourself, and then we can go from there.
It helps me to take notes during sessions, for example, in the tabletop games, because then you have to focus on the game. And that really helps me. I make my own notes. They're not that big. There's some kind of bullet points somewhere, something. It's not an entire page every session, but it helps.
If all of your other players are comfortable with it, a thing that I find helpful as a person with ADHD when I'm playing TTRPGs is having music in the background or sound effects or something, because it means that sometimes if my brain is struggling to focus on speech, it can go into the music and then come back into the speech. And it means that I'm still in the general world of the game, but like I haven't gone far away.
Music and atmosphere is important. I tend to play a lot with it, but it must be music that isn't too loud, because then I get overwhelmed. If there's too much noise at once and rhythmic noises, then I get overwhelmed or distracted or annoyed.
Instead of like getting overstimulated, just take a step away from the table, find yourself, calm down, just as the DM for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, however long it takes. Don't be ashamed to use coping mechanisms.
When the music is just right, I really just get in the moment, and it really helps for the concentration. Also, visual imagery. Also, as a GM, I really like to have a picture or a drawing for each character, because I find it very important to visualize that character.
I actually found the Glitter Hearts game really fun and a really nice experience as a person with ADHD. Partly that was because Kat understood that it was really helpful for me to be able to make notes whilst I was playing, and that made it easier for me to focus. But also because Kat was changing art on the screen, and that gave me something else to focus on. So when we would go from a portrait of an individual, one of us, to a group picture, it was just a little moment where I could kind of refresh my attention and my focus because something had changed on the screen.
Somewhere along the way, I read that people with ADHD they have a different processing of timing, which make them so impatient, and I think that can be the case with me.
For me, I don't process time well. It's like you're walking in the mist and you see only the things that are near you, and all the rest is obscured. That's how I process time. I can't plan in advance without me doing so very consciously. If I need to prepare for something that's in a few months, I need to first think about it and think about how I will set everything up so I will be on time. Otherwise, I can't be on time. I will just hug the deadline and start doing stuff an hour before the deadline ends, and that's too late. That's also why I got in trouble in school a lot, because I didn't know back then that was a problem for me, that I never did my homework, and then people started calling me lazy.
When I'm in a session and I am concentrating, I can last for a very long time in a session, which is just the most fun thing to do, I think. So a very long session with other concentrated players who are also really in the moment, and then just keep on playing without a time limit until you do get tired, and then eat something and then play again. And so that's like the best possible TTRPG day for me. I have a hard time noticing when I need a break. So maybe a break schedule would be a good idea for me. But now I take breaks when the moment is right to take a break. But sometimes that can take a very long time, and then you just keep on playing without a break. So I think a schedule would be better. I should look into that, probably.
I can often burn myself out without realizing it because of time blindness and because of my inability to regulate my attention. And that means that if I'm playing with someone who's like, oh, we're just going to play nonstop for 4 hours, then at the end I feel really exhausted and emotionally drained. I have a friend who has ADHD, and the way that they play is like every hour there's a 5-minute break. And it's not like we don't even leave the table, but it's just and stop and take a breath and then go back in. And I've found that was the most comfortable I was when playing a TTRPG.
I can never get my time or timing right. Online, for example, I will think, well, I have to be ready now. And then I still have to start my laptop, and I still have to open the programs, and I will be 5 or 10 minutes late every time. And as a GM, I will try to be early because I have to set up things, but I will always be too late to set up everything I wanted to set up. So I will be earlier than the players always, but I don't have enough time to set up everything. So I don't have a strategy yet. If you find a strategy, please let me know. I have tried putting my clock wrong. It doesn't work because you know that it's wrong. So I can't fool myself in that way.
I make sure that there's a clock within visual range at all times. It's why I have 2 screens that even if I'm using one, there's still a clock in visual range. But I don't really track time in time itself. I track time in, okay, I need to be there in time. Sometimes even earlier, just to make sure that I am on time. Because like, I know that if if I don't leave now, I'll probably forget to leave.
I get so caught up on having to be somewhere on time that it's very, very rare that I'm late for anything. And if I'm early, I'm so scared of being late that I'm normally like an hour early to somewhere. So actually, time management's not really something that I super duper struggle with, just because my anxiety wins out over my ADHD.
For something I'm excited to do, I'm always way early, and then I wait for the amount of time needed to be just in time. So I often am sitting on a bench near the house of a friend or whatever, just to wait for the appropriate time to arrive in. Gentle reminders are often the best to prevent me being way late or way early. Like, hey, see you in 10 minutes, a quick message or something. That would help out a lot with the stress that the issues with time management for me bring, the social stress.
I think for me now as a GM, with ADHD and with time blindness, I often have to set myself alarms to like be very conscious of like, how much time have we spent on this part of the game? How much time have we spent shopping? How much time do we need to go spend exploring? When is our break coming, and that kind of thing. At the start of the session, I also tell all of my players the times that I'm planning to do things by. And that means that my neurotypical players, especially on breaks, like that they will also be looking at the clock. And so I will invite people to work with me and help us figure it out together. My brain very rarely remembers the information I need it to remember. That can impact my life because if there are details in a campaign, I really, really struggle to remember certain things. But the way I work around that is because I often live transcribe sessions essentially to keep myself focused. What I do is every time at the start of a session, I reread my notes and then I remember.
Yes, I do have a hard time remembering stuff and organizing my thoughts. I also try to write everything down to combat this, but it doesn't always work. I forget everything that I haven't written down.
And sometimes, for now, our game that we're playing, some people on holiday, so we don't play it in a month. I know in 2 weeks we're going to pick it up, and I read the last 10 session notes or something to get back in the story and to get all the details and quests and side quests, because, yeah, I forget what is really going on. So I know we're at some place, of course, and I know what we're doing, but all the different puzzle pieces that brought you there, they're missing in my head in a couple of weeks. So yeah, I recapture the sessions all the time.
What I tend to do is like, you know, those like little spider diagrams. Just put like words that remind you of specific things that happened in a session, because I personally have like this thing that if I have the visual trigger or just like some type of trigger, I'll remember anything else. But you just need those little triggers to make sure that they happen.
Yeah, sometimes it's difficult to select the main task from the side task, and including in gaming, you in virtual tabletops, you got all the kind of the great quests for the game, and you got all those small side quests. And I love all the side quests, and sometimes it's, oh no, what was the big quest of the game? And then you have to go back into your notes. Oh yeah, we're gonna destroy the temple or something like it. But
I also do find maps very helpful, even if it's Roll20 or, you know, a very simple, it doesn't have to be an elaborate map, but just some visual representation of where things are, especially because if characters are moving around or something, then it's quite helpful to know where they moved, because sometimes I forget.
I will have a lot of maps, for example, of the world that I just have a copy of, and I will write on them and say, well, they went there and there, this happened, and they found these NPCs and these items. And it's just like a map, a binder full of papers, also very disorganized, but there is some organization in it. So I will always find what I need, but it's somewhere in there.
This is a weird one because I know how I should apply the structure, and this is something many people with ADHD will tell you. I know what I'm supposed to do. I know how I could do it. I just can't do it. I get this question asked a lot. Why don't you just keep a book and note everything down in it? Well, yeah, that's a good idea, but having a book and keeping it near you is something people with ADHD struggle with, because it depends on so many executive functions to open the book and have the book near you and have it always in the same place. It requires so much executive functioning that we're bad at having it. So anything that could solve our problems with executive functions relies heavily on executive functions. So it's something I will never be very good at.
A very short tip that I would use as a DM to get the attention of all my players would be to recapture the last session notes. It's easy. It's quick, it's low-hanging fruit, but it helps to get everybody on the same page.
So I find outlines really helpful because I need structure. So if someone says to me, hey, Ella, can you do this thing? But they don't say when they need it, and they don't say how important it is, 6 months later, I won't have made the character because I'll have forgotten, because in my brain, it won't have been important enough to like go to all of the extra effort that I have to go to to set alarms and do calendars and write or like make this big structure to help myself do it, the more structure someone gives me, the more able I am to do what they're asking of me. So, you know, if a GM says, I need you to make a character by Saturday at 5 p.m. and I need these details, and it's really important because if I don't have it, we won't be able to play the game, then I'll be like, right, okay, that's a priority. It's important. I have to do it by Saturday at 5 p.m. And I can do it and I can set alarms and I can make the effort to do it. I have so many other things to do that if someone just says, just do it at some point, that doesn't help me.
Apply a structure to everything. And a structure is best done in keywords and handed out to the persons who need to follow it. Can be anything. It can be what you're planning to discuss on a session 0. It can be the important information an NPC has given them. Everything. If you apply a structure to it, it's easier for the ADHD brain to latch onto it because we have no structure. If you provide it for us, it helps us out tremendously.
I'm literally fidgeting with something right now. But yeah, I fidget with stuff all the time just because I need to be doing something. I used to have a fidget spinner, but then I'd find that I'd get too fixated on watching that move and rather than what I'm meant to be doing. So I tend to just fiddle with like bits of tat on my desk.
I have like this little cube thing, yeah, and I'll just take like 2d20s and like start twirling them in your hands. Like anything is a stim toy if you're creative enough.
I can't use my fidget toy because it would keep clicking and clacking and annoy the audience. But I have a little stick in my hands that I'm turning in between my fingers. So I always fidget. And this is so weird because I've been 30 years in my life without diagnosis. I've not changed since I have it, but now I'm aware that I fidget. I wasn't even aware I was fidgeting up until I knew this was a thing we do, and now I notice I'm constantly holding something.
I love written handouts with letters, so you can when the party gets a letter, yes, somebody can read it, but yeah, in 10 minutes you forget everything, but then you can reread it again.
It's something, well, I can fidget with also, but it's stuff, and I like having stuff and different small pieces of paper in my notebook, and I love when my notebook is the most disorganized thing visually, but then that I can find some organization in it. When I have to find a piece of information, I just open my notebook and papers fly out of there, and I can find it when you give me some time.
Like my favorite game groups, we all have group chats and Discords, and we have pinned notes, and then I can go back and read them, and I find that very helpful. So a GM who's like, hey, just a reminder, we've got information about all of them, here's a link, and it's a folder that has all the information, or a Discord that has all the information. That's really, really helpful, especially if it's right before we play or it's in enough time that I can read it.
It's always nice to have specifically things like names. I'm terrible at remembering names. So like sometimes I might be like, oh, we got escorted to the place by the nice Knight man. And then I'm just like, I have no idea what Mr. Knight was called. I just know that he was nice and that I liked him. So yeah, having those like written outlays, mostly just as reference for like names and places, are really, really helpful, I find.
What I also like are some artwork sometimes, because if you're fighting something or something is, how does a building look, the DM describes what you can see, and you can think about the outlook, but about the layout of stuff, but it helps with the artwork to get all the details right.
When I get to play with my friends in person, I almost always make props. So what I often do is I'll go to like a cheap shop, like a Poundland or something, and I'll get like little objects that represent things in the stories or the characters. And I like to, like, if I'm GMing, I like to give them out at certain moments to like mark, like, this is a moment that happened. And now when I look at you, you have that object, which means I know that happened.
I tend to have no object permanence. If something isn't immediately visible, it doesn't exist to me.
Sometimes you'll buy yourself something nice, like something nice for food, and then it'll get to the back of the refrigerator somehow, and then a week later you'll go, oh yeah, I bought that last week. Like things like that, that kind of having those things kind of front and center is something that I find is a very common occurrence for myself.
And it's the same for the mist of the time. It's a little bit the same with objects. If I haven't got it near me in my sight, it just doesn't exist. So a prop would help me remembering it exists. I have metal coins I can hand out to players, and I can use myself just to remind me that there's someone giving them money or something like that. I have a lot of these little things that help me out and make sure it's like they scream, I exist, if it's immediately visible to me.
I find big walls of text incredibly intimidating and hard to digest. I don't like them.
I really can't read that. It takes me double or triple the time to get through that, because I always lose the sentence I was at, and I have to find it again, and then I was reading without thinking about it, and I have to go back.
If you imagine that that's like the page that you're reading, and a normal person would read like down like this, and then they'd swap the page. I read this, get distracted, read over here, realize that I'm meant to be over here still, read that bit, and then skip that because I've already read it, and then turn the page. Like, I get distracted by the smallest thing.
If it's not split up in a way that I find easy to pass and be able to like break down what elements there are of it, especially if it's technical writing like a game manual, I find it incredibly difficult to access and really off-putting, and it takes a lot of mental energy to try and focus enough to be able to navigate it.
Don't give me like entire walls of text. Like, just give it in paragraphs. Make it short. Make it a long text, but make it like the paragraphs are shorter. It's more easy to digest.
Using subheadings is really helpful. So saying, if you're talking about your character, this is their early life, this is their career, this is their family, this is the thing that happened to them, this is revenge or something like that.
Having the important bits in bold, if you have a long handout, important bits in bold makes it easier for me to come back to the part I needed to, or in color, because I color code about everything I do. It makes it easier for me to see the structure of it.
Color and bold text is a bit of a weird one for me because of my dyslexia. Because obviously there's like some colors are easier for my brain to like read than others. I know that lots of people with dyslexia like see better against different colors, but even better having if you wanted to present those text files to people, a good way to give them to them would maybe be something like Word, where they can actually put their own like filters in the background and make it accessible for them.
When I was diagnosed as a kid, it was the middle of the 90s. It was a bit a different time than is now. And with some pupils of mine, you can see it immediately. Yeah, they can't do anything about it. Just help them with the tips that helps you, and just try to get them on the right way and hope they develop their own strategies.
I wish I'd known as a child, because now knowing, I feel like I can give myself permission to do things differently, and I don't have to try and force myself to do things in the way that other people do, because maybe I need to do things differently. And my life is a lot easier, and I do things a lot better as a result. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye, everyone. Good luck with the rolls.
Good afternoon, good evening, and good luck. Bye, everyone.
Bye.